For 18 months, living in invisibility teaches you more about a person than proximity ever could. Like the way Nathan Moretti drinks his coffee black, without sugar. Always in the same dark gray ceramic mug with a faded logo at the bottom, at exactly 7:45 every morning. Or the slight tightening of his jaw before he delivers bad news during conference calls. Or the faint twitch of the muscles beneath skin that is always a little too pale from lack of sunlight. A twitch that appears only when he restrains emotion. Or how he taps the cufflink on his left wrist twice before walking into any negotiation. The way a baseball player clings to a ritual before stepping onto the field. I know these things because I spent a year and a half observing him from a distance, like a quiet scientist studying a star, watching, noting, learning patterns, never expecting to be seen in return. My desk sat exactly 10 feet from his office, within the executive suite of Moretti Logistics, perched on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, a place holding far more than customs paperwork and shipping contracts. Everyone who works there understands a simple truth. We are not just a logistics company, and Nathan Moretti is not merely a businessman. Beneath the polished manners and tailored suits stands a man who controls his world with a terrifying silence and a gaze sharp enough to stop someone mid-step. And I, Claire Bennett, 28 years old, am an executive assistant no one remembers, no one greets, no one calls by name, a shadow slipping between meetings and white-lit hallways. I choose silence because I need this job. I need the steady paycheck to send back to Brooklyn, where my mother works night shifts as a nurse, and my father battles unemployment and gray days with no clear end. Every morning at 6, I wake, catch the subway into the city, buy a cheese and egg sandwich from the familiar cart on 5th, and arrive at my desk by 7:35. I always arrive before the senior managers. I am never late. I never cause trouble. For 18 months, I lived in their world and yet barely existed within it. I witnessed meetings where people communicated more with their eyes than with words. I watched suitcases get sent out without any record. I mastered the art of bowing my head just enough, staying silent just enough, and always remembering that invisibility is a kind of armor. But that armor began to crack one autumn evening when a man who was not Nathan Moretti but his cousin walked up to my desk, smiled, and asked a simple question. "Are you single?" That question did more than pierce the quiet orbit I had lived in for 18 months. It made Nathan, who had never looked at me once, stop, turn back, and stare at me as if he were seeing me for the very first time. Everything shifted from that moment on, and I, someone who had once believed invisibility meant safety, found myself drawn into a world where a single glance could wound, and attention itself was a dangerous promise. If you are still listening and something in this story stirs a small echo inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories every day. And if you do not mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached, because we treasure every word you share. Nathan Moretti is the kind of man who makes a room fall silent before he even crosses the threshold. He never needs to raise his voice or brandish authority. His presence alone presses the air still. I learned this within the first few weeks, when people around me sat straighter and typed more softly as the clock neared 8. They knew he was coming. I knew it too. I no longer needed to check the time. I could hear his steady footsteps echoing from the hallway, the soft click of his office door unlocking, the quiet thud of his coffee mug settling onto the walnut desk. A rhythm so precise it might as well have been a metronome. He never arrived early, never arrived late, always exactly on time, as if trained by years of iron discipline. Every day he wore a three-piece suit, usually charcoal, sometimes navy. His shirt sleeves always extended exactly 3/4 of an inch beneath the jacket, the silver cufflinks plain but sharp. He never wore cologne. Instead, he carried the scent of leather, mild cigar smoke, and dark roasted coffee, a decidedly masculine fragrance that lingered longer than any perfume. He never made small talk. In meetings, he listened more than he spoke, his eyes fixed on whoever presented. He did not blink often. He made no unnecessary movements. When he spoke, his words sliced clean through the air, brief, precise, never repeated. Once was enough. If someone failed to understand, they would not sit in that conference room again. I once witnessed a senior manager leave the company after offering incorrect numbers during a quarterly review. No one discussed it. No one asked questions. By the next morning, the corporate email announced a personnel change. Nathan did not tolerate mistakes, much less repeated ones. And yet, I had never seen him angry. He never slammed a desk, never threw an object, never shouted. His anger was the kind of silence that made you want to apologize before you even knew what you had done wrong. A new receptionist once called him Mr. Moreno instead of Mr. Moretti. One look, and she went pale. 2 weeks later, she no longer worked in the building. Whenever he walked out of his office, conversations died mid-sentence. When he stepped into the elevator, no one dared join him. He was a magnetic field, drawing attention and simultaneously pushing people away, wrapped in a sphere of invisible glass. And yet, for 18 months, he never once looked at me. Even though I sat right by his door, printed his documents, scheduled his meetings, adjusted his calendar, prepared his presentations. I was a shadow, keeping everything running smoothly, unseen in his line of sight. It is strange how someone can know a man down to the smallest habits, how he eats lunch in exactly 15 minutes, always cuts his sandwich into 4 pieces with a personal knife, how he writes only with a fountain pen and blue-black ink, while he knows absolutely nothing about you. I once believed I would remain that way, a silent, administrative machine within the cold metal gears of the Moretti world. But the way he looked at me that day, after Luca's casual question, pulled me out of the shadows I had grown accustomed to inhabiting, and from that moment forward, step by step, I began to see far more of Nathan Moretti than I had ever imagined, and the frightening part was that it made me want to move closer instead of turning away. That afternoon began the way every ordinary day begins. I was sitting at my desk, adjusting last month's revenue report so it would be ready to print for the 3 o'clock meeting, while the autumn sunlight stretched through the windows like thin ribbons of gold draped across the smooth wooden surface. Nothing was unusual. Nothing hinted at change. Not until the elevator doors opened and Luca Moretti stepped out. He was nothing like Nathan. Luca carried an openness, a kind of bright, restless energy that made the air vibrate a little whenever he entered a room. With his clear blue eyes and a smile always waiting on his lips, he was the kind of man women in the office whispered about, while the men either admired him or kept a wary distance. He walked quickly toward the reception counter, then stopped directly in front of my desk. I looked up by instinct, ready to stand and ask what he needed, but before I could say a word, he leaned forward, resting both hands on the edge of my desk, and spoke in a tone that held a hint of mischief. "Claire, right?" I froze. For a brief moment I thought I misheard him. No one had ever said my name here. Not a manager, not human resources, not even the assistants who worked in the executive wing. The name Claire Bennett had almost never existed within these walls. Yet Luca Moretti, who had no reason whatsoever to know who I was, said it softly, clearly, as if it had always belonged in his memory. Heat rushed to my cheeks, a quiet confusion spreading through me. I nodded slightly. "Yes, I'm Claire. Can I help you?" Luca didn't answer right away. He narrowed his eyes as if appraising something I couldn't see, and then, as though he suddenly remembered something amusing, he let out a laugh. I just wanted to ask, are you seeing anyone? A question that seemed harmless on the surface, yet in this space, at that moment, it rang out like an alarm bell. I sat stunned, unsure how to respond. Perhaps I should have laughed politely or found a way to deflect. But before I could gather a single coherent thought, Nathan's office door swung open. I had never seen him move that quickly. He stood in the doorway, framed by the glow spilling from his office, his straight nose, his unreadable expression etched against the light. But his eyes froze the entire room. No one spoke. Luca turned, his mouth still holding that half-smile, though a spark of mischief flickered beneath it. Relax, cousin. I'm just teasing her a little. Nothing serious. But Nathan didn't smile. Not a lifted brow, not a nod. He looked at Luca, then at me. And for the first time, he didn't look through me, past me, or around me. He looked at me, directly. As if I were someone new who had materialized out of thin air. I couldn't move. My heartbeat thudded too fast, the air thickening around me. I could hear the printer spitting out paper sheet by sheet, one after another. Nathan finally spoke, his voice low and steady as it always was, but with an edge that sent a cold shiver down the spine. From this moment on, no one in this company approaches her, unless it is for legitimate work-related reasons. Understood? It wasn't merely an instruction. It was a decree. And in this world, a decree from Nathan Moretti might as well be a sealed sentence. Luca lifted his shoulders in a loose shrug, stepped back with an easy grin, and walked away as if nothing at all had happened. But I stayed in my chair for 10 long minutes, unable to move while my mind tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Why had Nathan reacted that way? Why me? For months, I had quietly wished for a day when he might notice me, even just a glance, a simple acknowledgement. But not like this. Not with those eyes. Not with that voice. Not by turning me into something forbidden in the eyes of everyone else. And yet, the truth was undeniable. He had looked at me. And from that moment on, I knew I would never again be invisible. The next morning, I arrived early as usual, but everything felt different. The familiar quiet of the office now seemed to watch me back. There were glances from the reception desk, a hurried look from a passing assistant, the stiff silence inside the elevator. Something had shifted. I could sense it in the air, in the tiniest details, the kind only someone who had lived too long in silence could recognize. When I reached my desk, a small cardboard box sat neatly on top, with a folded white sheet of paper beside it. I opened the box. Inside was a still warm croissant and a sugar-free latte, the exact order I usually picked up at the corner cafe, but had not had time for that morning. I unfolded the paper. No signature, no name, only 4 words in slightly slanted black ink, printed in clean capital letters. Don't skip breakfast. I looked around. No one seemed to notice, or perhaps they pretended not to. I lifted the cup to my lips. The temperature was perfect. Not too hot, not too cool. By noon, I was reaching for my wallet, ready to head to the cafeteria, when Thomas, the driver assigned to a handful of senior executives, appeared at my desk. He greeted me politely and informed me that my lunch had already been ordered and he would bring it up momentarily. I had never spoken to Thomas before. He usually moved beside Nathan or Luca, silent, composed, never venturing into the administrative area where I worked. Yet here he was, speaking to me. The meal arrived on porcelain plates instead of plastic containers, a serving of Italian pasta, a glass of fresh pomegranate juice, and a neatly folded white napkin. When I asked who had ordered it, Thomas merely shrugged. Orders from above. As if there were any doubt, the entire afternoon passed in a haze of unease. I reviewed Nathan's emails, checked his schedule, double-checked the notes I had prepared for his meeting. Nothing was out of place. And yet, the irregularities kept appearing. Conversations among coworkers fell silent as I walked by. The legal team, laughing moments earlier, dispersed instantly when I approached. A woman from accounting who once borrowed my chair avoided returning my morning greeting. I was no longer invisible, but not in the way I once hoped for. I had become the center of a strange, weighted caution, the subject of watchful eyes and intentional silences. And in a place like Moretti Logistics, silence always has meaning. By the end of the day, as I gathered my files to go home, Thomas reappeared. He informed me gently that, beginning today, I would have a car assigned to take me home. I tried to refuse, but his calm, resolute expression made it clear he wasn't there to negotiate. So I rode in silence. The black sedan glided through Manhattan's yellow-lit streets while I stared out the window, tangled in questions I could not untangle. Why me? Why had Nathan Moretti, a man who had not so much as glanced at me for 18 months, suddenly pulled me out of the dark and placed me at the center of a protection that felt as heavy as it was deliberate? I had no answers. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. After yesterday, I had become someone no one in that company would ever dare dismiss again. And even without a single word spoken, I understood clearly that I had been pulled into the orbit of a man whose attention was both a privilege and a chain. And once you fall into the gaze of Nathan Moretti, there is no returning to who you were before. I never received an invitation by text message, nor by email, nor through a casual conversation during working hours the way I once imagined it might happen. Instead, everything unfolded quietly, in the same understated manner that defines the world of Nathan Moretti. At 6:17 in the evening, just as I was packing my bag to leave the office, Thomas appeared once more, wearing the same calm, impassive expression, and speaking in that gentle, emotionless tone that seemed carved from discipline itself. "Ms. Clare, Mr. Moretti requests that you join him for dinner." I froze, my hand still gripping the strap of my bag, the entire room falling into stillness around me. I wanted to ask where, with whom, and why, but the words caught at the back of my throat. Thomas only inclined his head slightly toward the waiting elevator. No one else remained in the office. I stepped into the car, my mind heavy with unanswered questions. We did not drive far, only circled through a few blocks before turning into a narrow cobblestone alley. The restaurant revealed itself with an unassuming facade, no bright signage, just a dark wooden door with an antique brass handle, a place no passerby would ever stumble upon, a place one had to know existed in order to find. Nathan was seated at a table near the window, in a private corner lit by warm golden lamps, with soft jazz drifting through hidden speakers. He stood when I entered, pulling out my chair like a gentleman in an old film. A part of me still could not believe it that I, Claire Bennett, the woman who had lived almost 2 silent years inside his company, was now sitting opposite him at an intimate dinner. I didn't know how to begin. But he didn't leave me floundering. The first course arrived, and Nathan poured wine into my glass as though it were something he had done 100 times. He never glanced at the menu. Everything had been arranged in advance. Silence settled between us for several minutes, broken only by the soft sound of utensils touching porcelain. Then, at last, he spoke. "I do not know why it took me this long to notice you." A simple sentence, yet it drew every muscle in my body taut. I set my fork down and looked at him, waiting for an explanation. He did not avoid my gaze. Instead, he met it straight on, as if he needed me to understand that this was neither a joke nor a gesture of politeness. "You are the only person here who expects nothing," he said. "You do not try to draw attention. You do not pretend to be special. You work. Quietly, Consistently, I am surrounded by people who always want something from me, Claire, but you do not. I swallowed hard. Part of me still struggled to believe his words. I was not extraordinary, not beautiful in the dazzling way the women I had seen stepping out of his car often were. I was simply myself, ordinary, sufficient. Yet Nathan's gaze never wavered, and that unwavering focus sent a strange tremor through me. He did not speak about feelings, did not use sweet or flattering words. Everything he said carried the weight of a directive, succinct, measured, but undeniably heavy. He was not a man who knew how to charm, but I felt the care beneath his actions, the way he pushed my water glass closer when I coughed, the way he leaned in slightly when I spoke, even when my words were small and hesitant. When dessert arrived, he sat back, watching me in a thoughtful silence before asking, "Are you afraid of me?" The question stopped me cold. I should have said yes. I should have admitted that I was uneasy, that I didn't understand him, that I had no idea how dangerous his world was. But instead, I looked at him and answered slowly, "I do not know, but I do not want to walk away." He nodded, as though that were the only answer he'd been waiting for. And that night, for the first time since stepping into Moretti's empire, I no longer felt like an outsider. I was someone who had been seen. And though I did not yet understand where that truth would lead me, I knew I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The next morning, when I walked into the Moretti office, I no longer felt like a shadow. Nathan had not changed. He still stood behind the glass wall of his office with that quiet, commanding gaze, but now his presence seemed to shape every movement around me. In the weeks that followed that dinner, I began to realize that the office was not simply a place of contracts and paperwork. It was a finely tuned command center where seemingly ordinary decisions carried immense weight and irreversible consequences. I saw Nathan on calls, his voice low and decisive, each clipped word powerful enough to silence anyone on the other end. When he stepped out of his office, leaving Thomas stationed at the door, the atmosphere sharpened with focus and tension. Closed-door meetings I accidentally glimpsed revealed shadows I had never dared imagine. Men in expensive suits came and went, their expressions tight, hands trembling slightly, as though they had just concluded transactions that left them both relieved and terrified. I began to understand that Nathan's control over legitimate dealings, territorial boundaries, and matters of security was not born of luck or talent alone, but of a system of power built through both ruthlessness and remarkable intelligence. One afternoon, as I prepared files for a meeting, he appeared beside my desk without warning, standing there for a silent moment before quietly asking if I had eaten lunch. The question held far more than simple politeness. It was another layer of the protection he extended over me, watchful, without being forceful. I learned the small details: how he reviewed contracts, how he structured meetings, how Thomas moved through the building like a shadow tethered to him. I realized Nathan was not merely an executive. He was the central node in a complex web where every action triggered a chain reaction. I watched Roberto, his right hand, move with measured precision, observing, reporting, his position secured not only by loyalty, but by an acute ability to assess danger. Nathan taught me how to sense tension in a conversation, how to read opponents without a single direct question, and I began to see that what I once dismissed as corporate power plays were, in his world, decisions that could determine life or death. One evening, when the office was nearly empty, Nathan led me into a side room containing high-security files and equipment I had never known existed. He gave me a brief explanation of how information was classified, who had access to what, and why every detail had to be controlled with absolute precision. It dawned on me that my safety depended not only on physical measures, but on the way Nathan controlled information, the way he managed each link in his network. The weight of his responsibility filled the air around us, a mixture of fear and admiration settling into me. I saw clearly that Nathan's world was unlike anything I had ever encountered. It was built of both legality and shadow, of rules unspoken and boundaries unseen, understood only by those within the circle. I began to learn how to walk, how to listen, how to observe without being observed, not to become part of him, but to survive inside the world he ruled. Every step I took, every glance I gave, required intention, because I knew a single misstep could unleash consequences I could not begin to comprehend. And it was this truth about power, about danger, about the way Nathan commanded everything with intelligence, cold precision, and an unwavering form of protection toward me that made me understand I was no longer just an invisible assistant. I was stepping into a world from which I could not fully withdraw, even if I tried. And the deeper I learned, the clearer it became that understanding it was the only way to survive and the only way to remain beside Nathan Moretti. One afternoon, as I was arranging contracts for an important meeting, 3 men arrived in the office earlier than expected, their confidence so overpowering it felt like a pressure wave rolling across the room. They didn't bother hiding their condescension, and one of them, Vincent, with a smirk curling arrogantly at the corner of his mouth, asked offhandedly if I could make them coffee. A question that seemed harmless on the surface, yet carried the familiar weight of dismissal and prejudice I had endured for 18 months. Before I could respond, Nathan appeared, stepping out of his office, and though he stood there only a few seconds, the atmosphere shifted instantly. His gaze washed over the room, cold, sharp, a silence so formidable it froze all 3 men where they stood. In a voice low and heavy with authority, he asked, "Did you just call her that, Vincent?" And Vincent stammered that he only wanted coffee, but Nathan didn't move. His presence alone transformed the room into a stage where he was the immovable center of power. In the span of a heartbeat, I witnessed Nathan exercising his strength without shouting, without force, only with a gaze and a tone that made the 3 men understand immediately they had crossed a line. Vincent rose at his command, and Nathan stepped closer, close enough for me to see each subtle shift of muscle beneath his black vest, the way he controlled every detail of his body, his voice, the moment itself, like an artist shaping his work. He said clearly, "My secretary is Miss Bennet, not your subordinate," in a voice so cold it sent a tremor through me. And in that brief instant, I understood that Nathan did not simply protect me physically, he protected my dignity, my authority, and my place within both the office and his world. When the 3 men left with fear tightening their steps, Nathan turned to me, his eyes softening just slightly, almost apologetic for the tension I had endured, though the power radiating from him never dimmed. He explained that this was not personal sentiment but principle. Anyone who dared belittle or harm someone within his circle would pay the price, and that kind of protection required no long explanation. I listened, feeling both safe and stunned by the decisiveness in him, realizing that Nathan's concern and protection were inseparable from the way he operated, from personnel matters to the gravest decisions he made. He gestured lightly toward me. "Just so you know, Claire, you are seen now, not as an invisible shadow, but as someone who mattered." And in that moment I felt that the safety he provided came not only from guards or strict rules, but from his intelligence, his control, and his presence. From that moment on, the office was no longer a place where I existed quietly. It became a space where protection, authority, and responsibility converged, where I learned to read gestures, glances, even breaths, to understand my position and the boundaries no one was allowed to cross. A deep mixture of fear and gratitude moved through me as I realized that Nathan's world did not tolerate weakness or carelessness, but it offered those he valued an absolute safety I had only imagined before. From that day forward, as I walked through the office, I carried a new awareness of my place and worth. People around me grew cautious, watching me with a new expression, part respect, part restraint, and I knew the change had begun the moment Nathan defended me, not only with his words, but with the force of his presence, teaching me that power comes with responsibility. And his boundaries were not made to confine me, but to ensure I would never again be hurt by anyone's hand. From the moment Nathan put Vincent in his place for disrespecting me, I began to feel a subtle but undeniable shift in every daily interaction. Every gesture, every glance, every word from him made my heart race with both worry and an aching pull I couldn't name. His presence filled every space he entered. He walked through the office with absolute confidence, each movement radiating authority and control, and I realized I was being drawn into that gravity without wanting to escape. Whenever he paused near my desk, letting his eyes rest on me as though he were reading every unspoken thought, my skin grew sensitive, my pulse quickened. Yet a strange sense of safety wrapped around me, as if nothing and no one could reach me with him standing there. I began to notice the smallest things, the way he listened to every detail I shared, the way he watched the slightest changes in my expression, the way he remembered habits of mine I thought I had kept hidden. All of it stirred something inside me. Fear, yes, but also a quiet thrill I had never felt before. Confusion washed over me every time I remembered that Nathan was a dangerous man, powerful, unforgiving, a man capable of making anyone who crossed his boundary pay dearly. Yet he was also the only person who made me feel seen, protected, and significant. I realized the allure of him was not just in the cold exterior or the authority he carried, but in the rare fusion of control, care, and those unexpectedly gentle gestures he offered me, gestures that made me want to stay close, even knowing his world was filled with danger and harsh rules. There were nights when I left the office under the pale streetlights, still feeling the tremor in my heartbeat from remembering his gaze as he defended me against Vincent, and I wondered why I couldn't distance myself from the feeling of being safe and endangered at the same time. The constant worry about what he faced, about the risks surrounding him and me, tightened something inside my chest, making me want to run. Yet another part of me, buried deep, longed to remain near him, to stay inside the world he controlled, to continue being someone he looked at as important. I noticed every detail, the way his hand paused on his notebook when his eyes found mine, the way he adjusted the lighting in a room so I would feel more at ease, the way he intervened in subtle ways so I wouldn't be left behind or placed at risk. All of it wove together a feeling both safe and electrifying, leaving me cautious yet wanting more. Sometimes when Nathan spoke directly to me, his voice deep, strong, yet almost gentle, I felt my hands tremble without understanding why, a reaction I had never experienced with anyone before. Fear and attraction lived side by side, inseparable, and I realized it was this very complexity that made it impossible to step away from him, even when logic whispered warnings. I learned to observe, to sense, to breathe slowly whenever he came near, trying to steady myself. But the truth was that whenever Nathan entered a room, I felt myself pulled wholly into his gravity. Over time, I understood that fear was not entirely negative, but a part of the attraction, a mechanism that sharpened my senses, making me aware of every move he made, every shift in his tone, every look in his eyes. And this awareness made me feel more alive, more present, more real in Nathan's world. Day by day, this complicated rhythm became familiar, a cycle of fear, safety, thrill, and longing, leaving me both unsettled and craving more, until I realized he had claimed every inch of my thoughts and my emotions. And no matter how hard I tried, I could no longer walk away from this man. That afternoon began like any ordinary workday, the soft sunlight slipping through the office windows while I organized the files for the next morning's meeting, feeling that familiar mixture of anticipation and steady calm that always stirred in me whenever Nathan walked in. But that quiet rhythm shattered the moment I stepped out to get coffee. Thomas had already confirmed the area was clear. Michael followed just a few steps behind, everything proceeding exactly as protocol dictated, yet in a single blink, a man appeared directly in front of me. He was well-dressed, composed, and before I could react, he pressed a small object hard against my side, his voice low and urgent. "Don't make a sound, walk with me. If you scream, something terrible will happen." My heart seemed to stop, my body locked in place, but my mind went straight to every lesson Nathan had drilled into me: how to stay calm in danger, how to contain panic long enough to survive. I had to move. I had to go with him. A black car sat idle at the curb, engine running, waiting. He kept one hand gripping me as he pushed me toward it. My phone was snatched from my hand, the battery ripped out and thrown onto the street, severing every tracking line Nathan relied on. A surge of helplessness almost broke me, but I forced my eyes shut for a second, breathing slowly, reminding myself that Nathan would find me, he always found me, and that I only needed to stay alive long enough for him to do it. Each step into the car made my pulse spike, but I clung to the calm Nathan had taught me, refusing to let fear spill outward where it could be used against me. My hands trembled, but I kept my face still, my eyes scanning everything: the pavement, traffic, reflections in windows, searching for anything that might help later. The world blurred through streaks of red lights and the hum of the engine before the car finally stopped in an abandoned industrial zone, all rusted metal and crumbling concrete. The warehouse looked deserted from the outside, but inside everything was prepared. A single chair in the center of an empty room, ropes waiting, a camera already set on a tripod. This wasn't random. It was a message, deliberate, cold, and meant for Nathan. They tied my wrists and ankles, not tightly enough to injure, but enough to keep me still. Two men spoke to each other in a foreign language. A quick phone call followed. Then silence as they wiped away anything that could link them to the place, except for me. Fear pressed in from every corner, my heart beat a wild echo, but I fought to keep my expression calm. Nathan will come. Just survive. Minutes stretched into hours, an endless clock ticking inside my mind. My muscles burned, my hands went numb, and exhaustion threatened to drag me under, but I forced myself to stay alert, to calculate distances, to listen to every sigh of wind, every footstep that might approach. And then, faint at first, came the unmistakable sounds I had been waiting for. Footsteps firm, fast, purposeful. Then Nathan's voice calling my name, raw with real fear. I cried out as loudly as I could, my heart breaking open with relief. The warehouse door blew inward with a violent crash. Nathan was the first inside, Joseph and Michael on his heels, all three armed. Nathan's eyes swept the room with frightening intensity until they found me, and in that second, something in him broke his expression, flickering with terror, anger, and overwhelming relief. His hands trembled as he untied the ropes at my wrists and ankles, and I exhaled shakily as my pulse began to level. Nathan pulled me into his arms, and the heat and strength of him flooded through me. I felt the fear and fury radiating off him, saw the blood smeared on his gloves and collar, a silent confession that he had used every means, every ounce of power he possessed, to find me and eliminate anyone who stood in his way. I told him I stayed calm, that I remembered every lesson he ever taught me. He pressed his forehead to mine and said that was why I survived. That he would never blame me for anything I did to stay alive. I saw the strain in his face, the exhaustion lining his expression. This was the first time I had ever seen Nathan so close to losing control, and still he forced himself to focus. Joseph secured the perimeter, Michael guarded the exits, but Nathan stayed beside me, breathing deeply, forcing his fury back under the surface. His voice turned cold again, but his eyes still held a tremor of worry. He ordered us back to the car, lifting me against him as though he could shield me from the memory itself. Pressed against his chest, feeling every beat of his heart, every breath he drew, I understood the truth more clearly than ever. Whoever took me wanted to send a warning, but Nathan would be the one delivering consequences. And in that moment in his arms, surrounded by the wreckage of the danger that had tried to claim me, I finally understood that my presence in Nathan's world was not only something he cared for, but something that made him infinitely more dangerous. Because anyone who touched me had touched the one line he would never allow to be crossed. When Nathan received information about my location through a secret communication channel, he didn't hesitate. His steps grew faster, firmer, and I could almost imagine the tension hammering through his heartbeat with every call he made. Joseph and Michael at his side, the three of them moving together with the precision of men who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Streetlights streaked through the windows of the sleek black car they used to approach the site, and Nathan sat beside me, his face tight with focus, his eyes never leaving the device that displayed my coordinates. He reached over and gripped my hand, warmth grounding me, steadying my breath. Every street, every alleyway, every possible exit was already calculated in his mind, prepared long before we ever arrived. Every signal, every movement on the grid monitored and tracked. When the car finally stopped outside the old warehouse, the rusted steel doors looming like the jaws of something ancient, Nathan nodded once to Joseph and Michael, and all three stepped out with a tense, deliberate energy that made the air feel electric. I felt the shift instantly. Each of Nathan's steps was solid, commanding, without a fragment of doubt. He swept the area with sharp, practiced precision, every detail assessed in seconds. Then, with a violent push, he tore the warehouse door open, the sound exploding through the empty yard like a warning shot to anyone still lurking. Nathan entered first, eyes slicing across the room in an instant, and there I sat on the chair, the ropes loose but confining enough to keep me still. He came to me fast, his fingers working through the knots around my wrists and then my ankles, each motion efficient, cold, and meticulous. I could feel the icy concentration in every move he made. Joseph secured the perimeter. Michael guarded the exits, while Nathan leaned close, breathing deeply, his gaze locked onto me as if he were searching for every trace of fear, every sign I was truly unharmed. And I realized the fury in his eyes was not the controlled anger he used in business. It was the visceral, unfiltered rage of a man confronting the possibility that someone dared lay a hand on me. I fell against his chest, hearing the rapid, uneven beating of his heart, his arm tightening around my shoulders. He was both furious and terrified. The streaks of blood on his gloves and collar told me everything that Nathan had acted with brutal speed, without hesitation, to find me and eliminate anything in his way. His voice came low, rough, carrying a tremor I had never heard from him before. "I thought I lost you. 12 hours not knowing if you were alive." I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "I'm okay." I stayed calm. Nathan lowered his head until his chin brushed my shoulder, those deep black eyes filled with tension and a quiet, aching regret. Joseph issued orders to sweep the area again. Michael checked each exit with methodical intensity, and still Nathan stayed beside me, pulling in deep breaths, clawing his composure back inch by inch. His gaze grew colder as he examined the traces left by the kidnappers, calculating what they had done and what their next move would be. But beneath that icy surface was a fear so fierce it made my chest tighten. Nathan took my hand, lifted me gently from the chair, and drew me fully into his arms. Pressed against him, I felt every breath, every tremor, every ounce of strength he was trying to contain. I knew then that Nathan had come armed with a plan, swift, lethal, precise, moving like a silent predator who calculated every sound, every shadow, every possible route the enemy could take. I held on to him, breathing slowly the way he taught me, keeping my mind steady, my eyes never leaving his. My heart slammed wildly, but beneath that fear lived an unshakable certainty. Nathan would handle everything. He led me outside while Joseph and Michael confirmed no one was watching, no one following. I clung to him as we stepped back into the car, my body trembling. But the moment his arm wrapped around me again, safety returned like air to starving lungs. Nathan turned to Joseph and Michael, giving orders to track every inch of the area, to monitor all movement without missing a single detail. Even while holding me close, he commanded his team with the clarity of a man built for crisis, a strategist born from fire. As the car sped through the streets, I looked at Nathan in the passing glow of streetlights, the sharp lines of his face, the cold fury tightening his jaw, and behind it, the desperate worry he could not hide. In that moment, I understood something deeper. Nathan had stepped fully into the violent world he kept hidden for my sake, unleashing every resource, every connection, every ounce of power to ensure I stayed alive. Every action, every breath he took revealed his strength, his precision, and that unwavering determination that no one, no matter who they were, would ever get away with touching me. I saw violence and stillness coexist in him, the predator and the protector fused into one. And I understood more clearly than ever that I belonged to his world now, not only in the safety he offered, but in the power, the leadership, and the relentless control he wielded to keep me from harm. Pressed against him, feeling his warmth, his coiled strength, I trembled with fear and relief all at once. Every second felt stretched thin and fragile, yet absolutely safe. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, knowing he would not let go, and that no one would dare try to hurt me again that night. After that terrifying night, Nathan took me to the Moretti estate in Brooklyn Heights, a place entirely unlike the cold, polished office I had grown used to. The house was expansive, its warm white walls paired with gleaming oak floors, and the soft gold glow from the lamps cast a calm, intimate atmosphere over the elegant rooms. Nathan led me straight to the living area where a large sofa sat in the center, guiding me to sit with his hand still on my shoulder, steady and protective. The pressure just enough to remind me I was safe. Thomas and Marco followed closely behind, maintaining security without saying a word. I looked around and noticed still life paintings and scenes of Brooklyn streets hung with deliberate care. Nothing about the space was ostentatious, yet power seemed to settle into every corner. Nathan watched me quietly, those deep black eyes both cool and unexpectedly gentle. He poured a glass of water, his voice low and steady as he said, "Stay here a few days. Rest. You're safe." I swallowed hard, still trembling beneath the surface, but his presence made it easier to breathe. Every detail of the home had been prepared, a spacious bathroom with clean towels and personal items arranged neatly. I showered, washing away the grime and the lingering fear clinging to my skin. Nathan waited outside the door, not intruding, simply standing guard in a way that made me feel protected at every breath. When I stepped out in comfortable clothes, he invited me to sit at the small dining table. He gestured for Thomas to bring a light dinner, everything arranged thoughtfully as if he had anticipated what I could manage. I ate slowly, trying to steady myself, while Nathan sat across from me, eyes never straying far. I realized then that he wasn't just protecting me physically, he wanted me to understand his world. He talked about his legitimate businesses, explaining how he managed restaurants, an import company, and real estate holdings. Every detail was clear but not overwhelming, offered with a quiet intention to let me see the structure behind the shadows. I listened, trying to remember everything, trying to understand where I now stood. Nathan didn't hide the danger that existed around him, but he showed me only what I needed to know. When he asked how I felt, I told him honestly I was both afraid and strangely safe. He gave a faint smile, squeezing my hand lightly across the table, emphasizing that his presence wasn't meant to control me, but to protect me. In the days that followed, I learned the rhythm of the estate. Everything had purpose. Marco and Thomas appeared at scheduled intervals, not to cage me but to ensure I was never left vulnerable. Nathan let me sit in on small strategy meetings not involving the most dangerous parts of his world, but enough for me to understand how he made decisions. I took notes on my laptop, trying to absorb the logic and structure that governed everything he did. During the day, I learned how to notice subtle signs of danger, how Nathan read a room or evaluated a partner, how Joseph and Luca moved with wordless precision under his guidance. At night, I felt the unique quiet of the estate, the mix of stillness and the quiet gravity that seemed to surround Nathan's presence. Slowly, I recovered, both physically and emotionally. Each day, the anxiety loosened its grip, replaced by a growing certainty that I was genuinely safe here. Nathan watched every shift in my expression, every small movement, not to restrict me, but to respond if I needed him. I learned to trust that instinct in him, the way he carried both strength and restraint like two halves of the same truth. Throughout those days in the estate, I saw a very different Nathan from the distant leader at the office. Here he was a man who commanded without cruelty, powerful yet attentive, a protector who understood fear and knew how to quiet it. I began to see that living in Nathan's world wasn't just about danger, it was about realizing I mattered to him. Every word, every gesture he offered carried weight, intention, and beneath it all, a depth of care he rarely let others see. I felt the connection between us deepen, slow and undeniable. And though a small part of me still held fear, most of it was something else entirely: trust, gratitude, and the quiet knowledge that staying here wasn't merely a temporary refuge. It was the beginning of understanding Nathan's world from the inside. The moment I stopped being an outsider and became someone he protected, valued, and kept close every minute of the day. After those first quiet days in the Moretti estate, Nathan invited me into his study, a room lined with oak-paneled bookshelves filled with files and worn leather spines, the soft gold glow from a table lamp reflecting off the window that overlooked Manhattan. He settled behind his broad desk, rubbing his forehead, eyes fixed on the skyline yet clearly seeing something far beyond it. I sat across from him, waiting in silence, until he began speaking about his father, a man who had come from Naples to America in his youth, starting with construction jobs before securing his first business. His father had been strict, disciplined, but also someone who could see far beyond the present moment. Nathan recalled being a child accompanying him to meetings, learning how to maintain authority, how to deal with the disloyal, how to protect the family from threats that were never spoken aloud. When his father died, Nathan said, he had been only 19, standing at a crossroads that changed the course of his life. He had to choose between letting everything collapse or assuming a responsibility he had never been ready for. He spoke about the pressure of managing hundreds of employees, of holding together legitimate businesses alongside the darker operations woven beneath the surface. Nathan admitted that the power he inherited had come with choices that were never simple, decisions that carried consequences for many people. He looked at me with eyes both weary and unyielding, saying it was because of his father's lessons that he learned to restrain himself, to weigh every action, to hold power without abusing it recklessly. He confessed that this path often left him lonely, with very few real friends, but the people within his inner circle understood him and respected him because of it. Nathan emphasized that he did not regret what he had done. Every step, every decision, had been made to protect what mattered, to guard his family and those he considered loyal. He spoke about sleepless nights, spent figuring out how to keep everyone safe while maintaining the delicate balance of power in a world where one mistake could break everything. Nathan said he knew I had been afraid when he brought me to the estate, but he wanted me to understand that everything he did came from responsibility and genuine concern. That power was not merely strength, but a duty. He talked about the lessons his father left him, that power always carried consequences, and anyone who wielded it without understanding that truth would lose everything. I listened as each word seemed to open a hidden part of his life few people ever saw. When Nathan turned back to me, his voice was low but unwavering, speaking of past situations where careful judgment meant the difference between safety and disaster. He shared the loneliness of leadership, how he had learned that sometimes reason had to override emotion to keep everyone alive. He admitted that over the years he had built a thick armor, keeping distance so no one could exploit his vulnerabilities, but now he wanted me to know the person underneath the man, with fears, doubts, and a profound desire to protect those who mattered most. I felt deeply that Nathan was not just the powerful, dangerous leader others saw, but a man carrying an enormous weight on his shoulders. Every story he shared, every truth he revealed, allowed me to understand why he acted the way he did. Nathan sat quietly for a moment, his dark eyes drifting back toward the window, before he turned to me again. His voice steady as he said, "I don't want you to see only Nathan Moretti, the cold leader. I want you to understand the man I am, and why I had to become this way." I nodded, feeling a blend of fear and trust, realizing that knowing his past and the responsibility he bore made me appreciate every moment he protected me. Every decision he made, every gesture of care, was rooted in a legacy of power and duty passed down from his father, a legacy Nathan had carried, shaped, and strengthened into the world I was only just beginning to understand. After understanding more about Nathan's responsibilities and the weight of his past, I began to notice subtle yet powerful shifts in the way he cared for me and for my family. One afternoon, just after I returned home from work, my phone buzzed with a message from Thomas informing me that my father would be arranged a new job. At first, I didn't fully grasp what he meant. When I texted Nathan for clarification, he responded with a single, decisive sentence. He had prepared a managerial position for my father in one of his legitimate companies, with a good salary, full benefits, and a role that would allow my father to use his decades of experience without depending on the uncertainties of the job market. I stood still, overwhelmed by a mix of surprise and emotion. Nathan didn't want me to worry. He wanted me to focus on myself and my work. He told me this wasn't meant to buy loyalty or create dependence, but to ensure stability for my family, to ease the burden I had carried alone for so many years. In the days that followed, Thomas guided me through preparing my father's paperwork and necessary documents. Nathan instructed that everything be kept quiet, only those who needed the information would receive it. My father was welcomed into a managerial role at one of the Moretti-owned restaurants, a job suited to his experience, with a team under him, a higher salary than he had ever earned before, full insurance, and a stable working environment. My mother also received indirect support from Nathan so she could transfer her qualifications and apply for a position at a hospital near a new home, should they decide to move to New York. I listened to each step as it unfolded and felt something in my chest loosen. the heaviness that had lived there for years softening. Nathan didn't pry into my family's life, yet he structured everything so that none of us would suffer from a lack of options. He even told me that if my parents chose to stay in Brooklyn, he could arrange temporary transportation or adjusted compensation to maintain stability. Everything, he said, was in our hands. I began to see the precision and thoughtfulness behind every decision Nathan made. This was the first time I witnessed him extend his care to the people I loved, quietly but effectively, not just protecting me but shielding the life around me. I remembered all the evenings I came home exhausted, trying to send money to help, trying to carry the weight of my parents and my younger sister. And now Nathan had lifted part of that burden without me ever asking. He didn't want me to feel indebted or small. He simply wanted us to have a better chance at life. When I called my father to tell him about the new position, his voice grew deep and filled with emotion, surprise, and gratitude, intertwining at the realization that this opportunity could change everything for him and my mother. Nathan had quietly prepared a path for us all, giving my family a safer and more sustainable future. Warmth and gratitude flooded me, overcoming the lingering fear I had grown used to carrying. For the first time in years, I didn't feel helpless watching my family struggle under financial pressure. I sent Nathan a short message to thank him, expecting nothing more than a nod in return. His reply was simple but unwavering. Everything would be fine. He had arranged what needed to be arranged, and all we had to do was decide how to move forward. My father's first day at his new job passed with a quiet pride. He walked into his new office with a confidence I hadn't seen in him for years. My mother began preparing to work at a hospital, and my sister Kayla could finally focus on her studies without worrying about textbook costs. I watched everything unfold from a distance, realizing that Nathan had used his power not only to protect me, but to improve the lives of those I loved. He did it silently, without display, but with undeniable impact. I felt respect and warmth build inside me, something I had never experienced with anyone else. Nathan was not just a protector. He was a man who acted with depth, precision, and sincerity. In my heart, safety and gratitude blended, and I understood that from now on, I was not the only one being shielded. My family had entered Nathan's world as well, secure, respected, and supported by the quiet force of his influence. He had built an invisible network of protection around us without requiring my involvement or even my knowledge, all so my family could have a better life, free of fear and uncertainty. As I looked around the estate that evening, the warm light from the windows spilling across the oak walls, I felt the undeniable truth settle over me. My life was changing completely. I exhaled softly, partly relieved, partly overwhelmed, understanding that Nathan had not only stepped into my life, he had stepped into my family's life as well. As the night of the charity gala at the Brooklyn Museum approached, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, trying again and again the emerald green evening gown Nathan had chosen, every detail fitting perfectly. The soft fabric tracing my shape without being revealing, and I could feel my heartbeat quicken not only because it would be my first time appearing with Nathan in public, but because I was about to be noticed in a way entirely different from the office. When Thomas arrived exactly on time to pick me up, and I stepped into the car, I watched the city lights shimmer outside the window like tiny diamonds scattered across the night. Nathan appeared at the car door before we reached the entrance, a fleeting smile touching his lips, though his eyes remained observant and serious. He placed a steady hand at the small of my back, guiding me forward with a gesture that felt both protective and quietly possessive without a single word spoken. The moment we stepped into the gala, every gaze shifted in our direction. I felt the difference instantly. Nathan stayed close beside me, his hand brushing mine now and then, small, controlled touches that made it unmistakably clear to everyone that I wasn't just an employee accompanying him. I was someone who belonged to him. When he introduced me to each guest, he said only, "This is Claire Bennett." His voice low and certain, no further explanation, no mention of my job title. And with that alone, every person understood I mattered to Nathan in a way that needed no elaboration. Some looked at me with curiosity, others with thinly veiled disapproval, once they recognized I was the woman Nathan had been protecting and was now appearing with publicly. But I learned to breathe steadily, to walk beside him with quiet confidence, feeling the rhythm of his breath, sensing his watchful gaze sweeping over the crowd as though shielding me from even the stray glances that lingered too long. Everything had a purpose, every step, every gesture, every glance calibrated with precision. I listened as Nathan exchanged brief conversations with familiar faces, conversations about philanthropy, politics, and the legitimate businesses he was connected to. I realized my presence there wasn't simply about handling attention. It was Nathan's way of placing me within his world, a subtle declaration that carried far more weight than words. When Richard Castellano approached, I immediately recognized the calculating expression in his eyes, the way he assessed me like a variable that didn't belong. Nathan's hand settled lightly but firmly against my back. A silent warning to Richard not to look at me as though I were something he could appraise. Richard's expression tightened, and he stepped aside without a word. Nathan gave the slightest hint of a smile, though his eyes remained alert. Every movement felt like a lesson, a demonstration of power, protection, and intent. Under the soft shimmer of chandeliers, with strings of classical music weaving through the air and guests whispering behind champagne glasses, I felt wrapped in something that was both reassuring and overwhelming. Nathan led me toward the central area of the event, and every gaze followed us, curious, speculative, questioning the nature of what they were witnessing. But Nathan held control effortlessly. His hand brushed mine, a barely visible gesture yet grounding, and I understood that no one here could dismiss me as insignificant. We spoke with several familiar attendees, Nathan explaining the purpose of the gala while keeping me within his line of sight at all times. I could feel the weight of his power, the unspoken claim in every subtle gesture, the assurance of safety intertwined with a warning to anyone who might consider testing him. The evening continued in long, drawn-out moments in which I reminded myself to breathe, to smile, and sometimes to find Nathan's eyes just to reassure myself that I remained within the circle of his protection. The gala seemed endless, yet somewhere between the conversations, the soft music, and the glittering light, I learned to adjust to this new reality, being seen, being protected, being observed. Nathan did not leave my side for even a moment. His gaze swept every corner of the room, and I found myself leaning into that certainty, caught between fear and an unexpected sense of security. When the gala finally drew to a close, Nathan guided me outside, his eyes on mine with a certainty that made the night feel heavier, more defining. Everyone had seen me at his side. A line had been crossed, a truth made visible. I realized then that nothing would ever be the same. I was no longer invisible. I belonged to Nathan's world now openly, and the blend of fear and comfort filled my mind as we walked away from the event together. After the gala, I returned to my apartment with a turmoil I couldn't name, my mind replaying the image of Nathan standing close beside me, his hand resting lightly on my back, like an invisible reminder that I was no longer just an employee at his side. I was someone he protected, someone he publicly claimed as his own. Yet at the same time, that very public claim jolted me into recognizing just how thin the line was between love and power. I found myself wondering whether I truly belonged in this world of his, or if I was merely becoming a piece in a larger game of influence. I felt both safe and painfully vulnerable. Nathan hadn't loosened his control, not even a little. He still watched, still protected, still hovered near, but that nearness, that power wrapped around me, created an ache of confusion inside my chest, a pull between surrendering to him completely and wanting to reclaim my own ground. I remembered every glance, every gesture at the gala, the way he introduced me as someone important to him, the way his hand settled over mine, the way he silenced Richard Castellano with a single look of authority. All of it made me feel the gravity of what I was stepping into. A world that demanded not only safety, but understanding of power itself. I began to wonder whether love alone could survive in the storms of influence, in the decisions Nathan had to make, decisions I could not control or even fully comprehend. The tension gnawed at me even as I tried to focus on work. Looking at contracts, spreadsheets, and phone calls, I realized that everything now tied back to Nathan in ways I had never experienced. I was no longer a simple employee. I was becoming a link in the complex network surrounding him, someone whose choices, even the smallest, could ripple into his world and affect both of us. I felt uneasy, yet strangely exhilarated. I wanted to be close to Nathan, yet feared the boundaries imposed by his power. I questioned whether I had enough courage to accept the risks, the dangers, the inevitable conflicts just to remain by his side, or whether I needed to pull back for the sake of my own stability, a distance I knew would disappoint him. In quiet moments when he wasn't looking, I felt my heart pounding, caught between fear and longing, between wanting control and wanting to let go. I told myself I needed to be honest, to understand the line between genuine love and the influence of power. But then Nathan appeared without warning, catching me in the middle of my spiraling thoughts. His eyes swept over me, serious yet gentle, his hand resting on my shoulder, in a gesture that was soft, but carried unmistakable weight. I realized it wasn't just protection, it was also a test. An unspoken demand that I understand my place, that I be aware of the responsibility and the danger wrapped around us. I felt myself wanting to lean into him and push back all at once, confusion tightening my chest until I didn't know how to respond. Nathan began talking about work, about recent decisions, and I listened quietly, watching every movement, every flicker across his face. I understood then that the tension between love and power wouldn't be resolved quickly. It was part of the world I had stepped into, a challenge I would have to face if I wanted to remain connected to him. I exhaled slowly, my heartbeat easing a little when he finally withdrew his hand, though his presence still weighed heavily in the room. I knew peaceful moments with him would always be temporary. Every action, every word of mine would now be measured, evaluated, and no matter how much I wished otherwise, I had already been pulled into Nathan's world of influence and devotion, caught between desire and fear, belonging and autonomy. I found myself doubting my own strength, my ability to endure, to choose. And yet, beneath all that uncertainty, a fierce longing rose, an undeniable desire to stay, to face every danger, to learn how to balance love and power in the world of Nathan Moretti. The next morning, Nathan called me into his office with a seriousness I had never seen in him before. He closed the door behind us, sat down at his desk, and looked straight into my eyes with a gaze that was both steady and burdened. The air in the room felt heavy, as if every important decision in the world had been compressed into this single moment. He began talking about his world, about the risks, the people who might try to use my closeness to him to apply pressure or harm him, about the things I had never known and would not easily accept if I stepped in any deeper. I felt the tension in every word he spoke, every breath he took. He didn't hide anything. He didn't sugarcoat a single truth. Everything came out plainly. I had the option to walk away, to step out of his world, to return to a safer, simpler life. But if I chose to stay, I would no longer be just an employee, no longer just a lover. I would become an inseparable part of the power network, strategy, and sometimes violence that he governed. Nathan explained the security measures, the layers of protection, the restrictions I would have to accept, the plans for movement, the protocols to keep me safe. I listened, realizing that he was giving me a real exit, one without manipulation, without emotional pressure. For the first time in months, I stood in front of a choice that was entirely mine, not driven by money, not by necessity, not by fear, just mine. My heart pounded. Fear rose in my chest because I knew that choosing to stay would change everything forever. Peace would be gone. I would be stepping into a world I could not predict, where every decision carried consequences, where Nathan was not just a man I loved, but a powerful figure I needed to understand and accept. He watched me silently, his eyes dark but full of trust and respect, as if he were handing me complete authority over the future. I felt the weight of that freedom, a freedom heavy with responsibility. I knew neither path would be simple. I thought of the quiet days at work, the fear of being followed, the anxiety of threats sent in the shadows, the moments when I felt close to Nathan but kept my distance. Everything had led to this point. I realized I was more attached than I had allowed myself to admit. His presence had already rooted itself into my life. I thought about my family, the people I wanted to protect, the things I had given up to stand beside him, and the undeniable feeling he brought me safety. Yes, but also a strange fire stirred by the proximity to his power. I took a long breath, trying to untangle the chaos of thoughts circling my mind. I knew that choosing to stay meant accepting risks I couldn't yet see, but also the chance to understand him fully, to step into his world with intention. Nathan leaned forward, his voice low and steady. He told me that if I stayed, he would ensure I was protected as much as possible, but he couldn't erase all danger. And if I chose to leave, he would respect it, return me to a safe and distant life. He said nothing more. He simply waited. His eyes searched mine, quiet but unyielding. I felt the weight of the decision tightening around my chest, my heart beat loud and fast, but somewhere beneath it, something inside me loosened. I wasn't being forced. I wasn't being manipulated. I had the right to choose. Nathan had given me the chance to stand on my own feet, to choose between safety and love, between autonomy and power, between the familiar and the unknown. And finally, after a long minute of silence, I met his gaze and told him, my voice trembling but firm, that I would stay. I would accept every risk, every challenge. I would step into his world completely. He nodded once. A faint smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained solemn, as if he both honored my choice and acknowledged that from this moment on, neither of us would have a path back. My whole body felt tight with adrenaline, but beneath it was a resolve I hadn't felt before. This decision was mine, purely mine. Nathan stood, crossed the room, and placed a hand on my shoulder, light, but full of meaning. Almost like a vow. From now on, we would walk into this together. There was no turning back. My heartbeat thundered, but this time it wasn't fear. It was conviction. I had chosen Nathan. His world, his power, his love, and somehow, that choice made me feel more alive than I ever had. When I left his office that day, my chest felt both lighter and heavier at once. I had made my choice, and there was no undoing it. Staying meant embracing everything: the shadows, the danger, the control, the intensity, but also the chance to truly stand beside him. Walking down the hallway, everything felt sharper, every sound, every passing glance. I could feel the shift in how my coworkers looked at me. I wasn't invisible anymore. Nathan had marked me, and everyone knew it. At my desk, my hands still trembling slightly, I opened the files Nathan had handed me to prepare for tomorrow's meetings. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to that defining moment, the moment I chose him, and chose the life that came with him. The afternoon slipped by with a tight silence. Each time Nathan appeared at the office doorway, even for a moment, I felt the meaning behind every glance, every subtle gesture. He didn't have to speak. His presence alone told me he was watching, protecting, assessing, and giving me strength. The sense of being recognized and protected filled me with a strange blend of comfort and adrenaline. The safety Nathan offered me wasn't confinement, it was the choice to survive and grow in a dangerous world. That evening, when he returned to the Moretti estate, I followed him, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to understand him, to learn this world from the inside. We walked through long hallways and elegant rooms marked by silent authority. I watched how he interacted with staff and partners, how commands flowed effortlessly from him, how respect followed everywhere he went. I studied the unspoken rules, the invisible lines, the mechanisms of survival in his world. Nathan led me into his office, the warm light spilling softly through the windows. I sat down. He stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the desk as he spoke, his voice steady, deep, but grave. He reminded me of the rules, the caution I must carry, the ways to handle difficult situations. I listened without interrupting. Every word was a lesson, a warning, and a sign that he now trusted me with truths he shared with no one else. We reviewed plans together, security protocols, travel schedules, critical meetings, the complex relationships I needed to understand. I realized then that this was no longer about work or protection. It was partnership. He was handing me not just information, but responsibility. Something like power. By the end of the night, when the world felt quieter, I sat beside Nathan in the deep leather chair, his hand resting on my shoulder. Warm, steady, heavy with meaning. I looked into his eyes and told him clearly for the first time without doubt or fear that I would not back down. I would stay. I would face everything with him. Nathan smiled, though his eyes stayed intense. He knew, as I did, that from this moment forward, there was no turning away. I nodded, heart racing but strangely calm. I had chosen to stay, to trust, to stand beside him. And with that choice, I stepped fully into a world I had once only watched from the outside, now a part of it, bound to it, and bound to him. The fear, the excitement, the comfort, the uncertainty, they all swirled together inside me. But at the center was determination. I was ready for whatever was coming, and from this moment on, nothing and no one would pull me away from Nathan. We would face every danger, every secret, every moment together. And I knew, deep in my chest, that I would not regret it. This choice, this commitment was mine, entirely, absolutely. That night, as the lights in the Moretti estate softened and the city outside sank into its quiet hum, I sat beside Nathan in the living room, my heart still racing from the tension of the past days and the weight of the choices we had made. Nathan said nothing at first, only stood near the window, his eyes fixed on the shimmering skyline. I could sense the calm in him, but also the quiet contemplation woven through every movement. Then he turned toward me, his voice low and warm, carrying a tenderness that made my breath catch. He walked over, gently taking my hand, and I felt a tremor of surprise ripple through me even though I didn't pull away. Nathan leaned down slightly, his voice almost a whisper. "Claire, there's something I want to ask you." My heart tightened painfully, knowing this moment mattered but unaware of exactly what was coming. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, square and unexpectedly heavy with its significance. My breath hitched as the lid opened to reveal the ring inside, simple, elegant, yet powerful in its meaning. Nathan sank to one knee as naturally as if the gesture had always belonged to him. No hesitation, no theatrics. His eyes held mine with a depth that felt like an entire confession spoken without a single word. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled just enough for me to hear the emotion beneath his composure. Will you be mine not just in the work we do together, but in life, in every joy and every worry, in every moment of safety and every risk, beside me, always beside me. Every sound around us seemed to fall away. I felt my heartbeat align with his, felt every fear, every uncertainty, every question about the future gather into this single point in time. I didn't need to think long. I already knew the answer in my bones. I took a breath and let the words come, soft but certain. Yes, Nathan, I will. A smile broke across his face, gentle, almost fragile, but anchored by undeniable resolve. He slid the ring onto my finger with a touch that was both delicate and deliberate, as if sealing a vow that could not be undone. Nathan rose and drew me into his arms, holding me tightly, his embrace warm and steady in a way that made me feel safer than I had ever felt in my life. He pressed a kiss to my forehead, light but carrying the full weight of his commitment. I laid my hand against his chest, where his heartbeat thudded strong and even, and I understood then that every risk, every danger, every difficult choice had been worth reaching this moment. We stayed wrapped in each other's arms, quiet and still, connected by breath and heartbeat alone. The world beyond those walls faded into insignificance. Nathan murmured against my hair, "You are mine, and I am yours, always." I smiled through the tears welling in my eyes. "And I choose you, Nathan, completely and fully." We stood together in the hush of the room, the soft light casting a gentle glow across our faces, and I felt a profound sense of peace, safety, and certainty settle deep within me. The proposal wasn't grand or extravagant. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was simple, intimate, and ours alone, yet powerful enough to shift the course of our lives. I felt the bond between us tighten, our hearts aligning with a shared understanding, a shared promise. From this moment forward, we would step into a new life together, ready to face every challenge, danger, joy, and sorrow as one. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth and significance of the moment spread through every part of me. Nathan lifted a hand to my cheek and tilted my face toward his, kissing me softly, unhurried, unforced, full of emotion and devotion. I returned the kiss gently but wholeheartedly, knowing it was a promise in itself, a vow to stand beside him, to protect and choose each other in every circumstance. When we finally pulled apart, Nathan's gaze held mine deep, steady, and enormously reassuring. I felt the shift inside me, the understanding that nothing would ever be the same again. I was no longer the woman standing on the edges of his world. I had become part of it, seen, acknowledged, protected, and loved with a force that was both fierce and tender. The two of us stood there in silence, sharing the rhythm of our breathing, knowing this moment, this yes, marked a turning point in both our lives, a place where love, power, and trust came together to create something unbreakable. We smiled at each other, and in that smile, I knew I would never regret choosing Nathan, choosing his world, and choosing myself within this relationship. This quiet, deeply emotional moment would remain etched in my heart forever, a reminder that sometimes a complete and fearless choice is born from a single brave breath, a single whispered yes, and a willingness to believe in the love you choose. Early on a quiet weekend morning, I stepped into a small church, tucked away along a peaceful street in Brooklyn Heights, the soft light filtering through stained glass windows scattering gentle colors across the polished wooden floor. My hand rested in Nathan's, my heart pounding, my chest warm with a mix of nerves and happiness. There was no crowd of strangers, no noise or showiness, only a few carefully chosen people Nathan trusted, including my mother, my father, and my sister Kayla. Nathan stood before the altar, dressed simply yet with a quiet elegance, his gaze searching for me, steadying me, filled with a love that made my breath catch. As I walked toward him, it felt as though I were stepping across an invisible threshold, leaving behind the version of myself who had once been a small, ordinary office girl, and becoming Claire Moretti, the woman of a powerful man, the man I had chosen to share my life with. The church music rose around us soft, reverent, and each note seemed to travel through me like a trembling ribbon of emotion. Nathan squeezed my hand tighter, lowering his head slightly. When the priest asked us for our vows, I looked into Nathan's eyes and saw sincerity, commitment, and every challenge we would meet side by side. I nodded, my heart overflowing with trust. Nathan spoke his vow in a deep, warm voice edged with unwavering certainty, and even though the ceremony was simple, without grandeur, every word felt enormous. They weren't just promises of love, but of partnership, protection, and the sharing of every part of life, light and shadow, safety and danger. My eyes welled when I heard him speak words I knew he meant with every fiber of his being. I gave my vow in return, soft yet firm, and when the priest pronounced us husband and wife, a strange, powerful sensation washed over me, fear and joy, relief, and a new sense of strength blending into one. Nathan pulled me into his arms and pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead, a gesture both sweet and protective. Together we stepped out of the church into the bright morning light streaming through dew-damp leaves, the air peaceful but full of life. A few of Nathan's cars waited outside, and Thomas opened the door for us. Each small detail, the cool breeze against my skin, the pride and quiet joy in Nathan's eyes made everything feel real. We climbed into the car, hands still clasped. Nathan leaned toward me and whispered, "You are now Claire Moretti." I smiled, feeling something inside me settle into place as though I finally belonged somewhere that was both safe and demanding. We arrived at a small wedding reception held in the garden behind the Moretti estate, surrounded only by close friends and family. The tables were set with elegance but without extravagance, candlelight flickering among fresh flowers, creating an intimate and warm atmosphere. Nathan led me to the center of the space, and though people watched, their eyes held no judgment or spectacle, only a quiet acknowledgement that I was his. We raised our glasses of wine and shared our first kiss as husband and wife. For a moment, every tension, every threat, every shadow from outside our world faded away. There was only us, and the fullness of standing there together. Nathan whispered against my ear, "We did it. And from now on, you are mine completely and without separation." I closed my eyes, feeling the heat of his embrace, the steady rhythm of his heart beneath my palm, realizing that every challenge, every scary moment, every difficult choice had led me here to this calm yet weighty peace. I was now the wife of Nathan Moretti, the woman he had chosen to walk into his world, not to be overpowered by it, but to share with him the weight of responsibility, the reach of influence, the presence of love, and the dangers that hovered at the edges of his life. We looked around at our families, mine smiling with a quiet sense of relief and joy, while Nathan held my hand tighter. In that moment, I understood that every decision from here on would carry new meaning. I walked with him, feeling protected, cherished, and seen. I was now Claire Moretti, and this secret wedding, quiet, intimate, profound, would remain etched in my heart forever. A symbol of love, choice, and complete commitment, no matter what challenges the world outside might bring. When I look back at everything I have been through, from the quiet days sitting at my desk watching Nathan from a distance, to the first moments he looked at me, to every time I found myself torn between fear and an undeniable pull toward him, to the night he rescued me from danger, and finally to the moment I became Claire Moretti in his arms, I realized that nothing in this life happens by accident. Every choice has its reason, and every moment of pain or happiness has shaped the person I am today. I chose this life with my mind fully awake, with my heart open, and with the courage it took to step into Nathan's world, a world filled with power, responsibility, challenges, but also overflowing with love and protection. I've learned that in love and in life, we sometimes face decisions that feel impossibly difficult, but it is through those choices that we discover our true worth. I've come to understand that trusting someone worthy, choosing to stand beside them even when the road is uncertain, can give you a strength you never knew you had. My story is proof that love is not just a feeling, it is a commitment, a daily choice to walk together, to overcome every obstacle side by side, and to build a world that belongs to both. The message I want to leave with you is this: be brave enough to follow your own choices, unafraid of challenges or hardship, because only when you step outside your comfort zone will you discover just how strong and how joyful you can truly be. If my story has inspired you, please subscribe, like, and share this video so you won't miss the touching and meaningful stories we share every day. I would also love to know what you felt while listening to this, whether it stirred thoughts, memories, or experiences from your own life. Leave a comment below so I can hear the heartfelt reflections you carry. Every comment matters, and each one helps us connect more deeply with one another. Thank you for taking the time to experience this story with me. I wish all of you who are watching good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue to bring you powerful stories, meaningful lessons, and deep life experiences you won't want to miss.